by setting up an export compliance program. So depending on the size of your company, some of you folks are 1 and 2 person mom and pop operations on your kitchen table. Some of you are multi-billion-dollar corporations. So depending on what you're working with, you have to determine what makes sense for the kind of export compliance program you're going to put together. Are you centralized or decentralized? Do you have overseas subsidiaries? You know, you want to make sure you assign the roles and responsibilities if it's a big company. Um, Take a look at the volume of your exports. If you have lots and lots of volume, then that's even more important to have this. And it's always a good thing to have a relationship with business partners to help you with your compliance program. Next, please. So we've broken this down to 8 different elements of an effective compliance program. And we're going to go through them one by one and kind of drill down into what we mean by the different headings here and what would be good for you to take a look at. So let's start with management commitment. If you don't have the support from your management, it's not going to work. You're going to have their support. Now, we all take calls all day long, and sometimes we get people who say, I'm all on board with this compliance stuff, but my boss is not on board with it at all. Like, okay, that's not good. Or, well, they're not sure or whatever. So anyway, it's hopeful that we educate your boss and your company on the value of complying with the regulations for U.S. national security and foreign policy interest, and to keep your company shipping uninterrupted without any issues, as long as you comply with the regulations. So once they're on board, that you definitely need to get the resources from them in order to do what it takes, and hopefully they support change. And it's a long-term investment. It definitely pays off in dividends. What happens is, if you have something that gets stopped by outbound U.S. Customs, and they have to do a license determination, then because you didn't put in the right ECCN, or it's missing everything, it causes a lot of challenges, and you don't want to get involved in that. So anyway, if your management's on board with it, that's good, and hopefully they are. I'm sure all of you who are here uh, listening to our presentation, obviously our management's on board, and we appreciate that. Next slide, please. So within our policy guide that I just talked about, we do have a sample of the management commitment statement in that book. So, don't be afraid of using that. It's in here. It's obviously great if you have it from the president or CEO, and make sure that everyone knows that you want to make sure that each employee reads this, signs it, and all that stuff, and they're on board. Next, please. The reason you should care is, again, we'd like to have you think national security is important. Job security is important. I mean, if you send something out without a license and it messes something up bad at your company, maybe your company's not going to be so thrilled about that. And if you mess up really badly at your company, you might get a bad reputation. Like if your company gets prosecuted for violating the regulations, sometimes it goes into the news media, and they're like, "Oh, it's that company. Oh boy." So anyway, it's best that those are a couple good reasons to care. Next slide, please. We have a great tool that is available on our website called "Don't Let This Happen to You." I think that James Davis mentioned that yesterday, and you can obtain that from our website. And that's a great thing to have to help your management get convinced that this is a good idea to comply with our regulations, because you'll see when you open it up, there's lots of examples of companies, and sometimes people open up this book and they go, "Oh my gosh, that's our competitor, and wow, did they get in trouble, and boy, they got fined millions of dollars, or these people went to jail." So once management sees that and says, "Oh boy, that is something to be concerned about," it's a good idea to go that. And you don't always have to, you use the carrot and the stick, right? So sometimes the stick is, oh boy, you're going to get written up or punished if you mess up um, in the regulations. But then you go, oh, you know what? You're doing a great job of complying. How about we give you a nice parking spot in the parking structure? For us here, if someone gave us a nice reserve spot in our building, it'd be worth $100 a month. So hopefully, you at your company can offer your star compliance employees a free parking spot and give them a little bit of a privilege for the rewarding their buy-in. Next, please. Now we're going to talk about the component of an element of risk assessment. And we're going to go over things that we see out there that are we frequently run across on our phone calls and how to how to contend with what's the best solution. So if you've only got one person in your export compliance compartment, gosh, if they go on vacation, they get sick or they quit, you got a big problem. So it's always a good idea to have at least one more person behind you, or at least a compliance team. Um, if you are not good at doing your authorization checks and you are, shipping things without a license, you want to develop a license determination matrix. We're going to show you an example of that, and that example um, comes from this compliance guidelines that I was talking about from the audit module and the templates. Make sure that if you have foreign nationals working in your organization in the United States, that you understand the deemed exports rules and the technology control plan. Um, Obviously, you want to have a compliance structure. Um, and so the answer is to do a lot of checklists and automate the process if you can. Like I said, we have these audit modules, and as we go through our elements, you're going to be seeing all these things that you probably can't see that too well. But anyway, all the examples I'm going to show today are in this book that you can print out and use with no restrictions on copyright. Make sure you definitely have a great relationship with your freight forwarder or courier service. It's good to get because sometimes they'll stop your shipments. They go, oh, there's no ECCN on here, and how do we do that, and what do we do, and all that kind of stuff. So, and be on top of the shipping documents. That we'll talk about how having everything conform is a good idea. Definitely, you want to take a look at a screening process. Use our consolidated screening list. We'll talk more later about other options for screening to see if anyone's on those lists of concern. And it's always a good idea to use a destination control statement we talked about. That's going to help put your customer on guard that says that you've shipped these items in conformance with the U.S. Export Administration regulations, and diversion contrary to U.S. law is prohibited. That's kind of a synopsis of what that says in part 758.6 of the EAR. Now we're going to take a look at export authorization. What's the next step here? Export authorization, and that is, again, you got to really be on top of your game as soon as you get an order. Okay, first of all, whose jurisdiction are you going to be under? Are you going to be under the ITAR, International Traffic in Arms Regulations, or the EAR? That's typically the choices you have for most of our attendees in a lot of these fields. So remember, the commodity jurisdiction process is available for you with the Department of State Directorate of Defense Trade Controls. They'll tell you whether it's EAR jurisdiction or ITAR jurisdiction. Then once that is determined, if you're under us, then you classify your item, determining the ECCN or the designation of EAR 99, and then you determine if there's a license required based on the ECCN and the destination. Next slide, please. So here's something that helps people organize things and get things into, make it easy. So if you guys self-classify items and you have an engineer that helps you do that, because sometimes an engineer is very helpful if you're trying to classify your own item at your company. I had engineers help me when we were doing classifications at our company when I was exporting way back in the day. And anyway, you have all your top products for export. You want to, have a description of the item, technical specs, agency jurisdiction. So maybe it's ITAR or EAR, all that kind of stuff. Let's look at an example of what one company might have as a what we call a license determination matrix. And you do want to occasionally take a look and make sure that your ECCNs are up to date and your license exceptions are up to date. If you create a matrix like this, just keep it on top of it. So, for example, most companies ship to more than one country in the world. So, in this case, this country says, okay, they ship things to the UK, and that's under BIS jurisdiction, and it's 38001.A.5, and based on typical due diligence, assuming there's no end users of concern or end uses of concern, they think they can use license exception STA. Then the next one going to Sweden, they've got a 1C351. That's predetermined by the ECCN reasons for control, who's involved in the transaction, what they're going to use it for, license required. Valves goes down the line. Then there's other ones. Oh, there's one for Germany. Okay, DDTC, military aircraft parts. Some military aircraft parts are under the U.S. Department of State, and some are under the EAR, so 600 series. Iron pipes under BIS to Canada, bottom one. EAR 99 is the designation, and NLR is the authorization. Again, that's just assuming item and destination, not taking into account end user and end use, because end user and end use could change any of these authorizations in the end. Next, please. So for free, we have the consolidated screening list that we told you about. It's on the homepage of our website. You click on there. Or, next slide, you can shop around. We suggest you shop around. And there are folks out there that have third-party screening services. Brian got that question. We are not permitted to recommend any particular company that does screening. There are third-party solutions out there. So if you go to industry conferences, you might ask your colleagues over there what they use. If you ever go to our policy conference in Washington, D.C. update and run into other colleagues, or if you go to our in-person seminars, which we have one coming up in Los Angeles in April, you can ask your colleagues and they can recommend to you or tell you about what they're using. Instead of the consolidated screening list, they're using another service that checks these lists also. And whatever they say, I think if you do get a hit on those lists, I do strongly suggest that you check that against the consolidated screening list to see if it's matches, and also maybe call us to back up as well. Frequency of screening, it's a common question. When should you look at the consolidated screening list? The best practice I did when I was an exporter, and I've seen most companies use, is you get an order today, and sometimes you ship it tomorrow. So you get the order today, your sales department goes, are they on the consolidated screening list? Nope, good. Then it goes to shipping department, they ship it out. Before they ship it, they check it again. Sometimes you get an order at your organization and it takes 6 months to build something. So you get an order and you go, okay, let's take a look at if anyone's on the screening list, if it's a party of concern, if they aren't turning up on the denied persons list or something. It's good to find that out right when you get the order, instead of not looking now, spending 6 months to build it, and then, oh, it's about time to ship. Then you put in the consolidated screens and go, oh my gosh, the customer is on the denied persons list. I will get in trouble if I send them anything. So as soon as you get the order and right before you ship is my recommendation as a best practice to screen for parties of concern using consolidated screening list or whatever third-party solution you choose to use in your organization. Next, please. Okay, so every export license comes with certain conditions. So once we issue you an export license, the licensing officer says, okay, these are the conditions. Do you agree with these conditions or not? And if you agree with them, great, we're going to grant you the license. If you don't agree with the conditions and you have valid reasons you feel that you don't want to comply with those conditions, then we might get you in touch with the licensing officer and you guys can communicate about it. Doesn't mean that you're going to allow you to avoid those conditions. So just know that each license that you get from BIS is going to have some kind of conditions that you want to comply with. Next, please. License exceptions, they change. Some are added and some are removed. For many years, we had license exception CIV. License exception CIV was removed a couple of years ago. There was no longer a use for it. And as time has gone on, we've added and created new license exceptions. For quite a while, we had not very many license exceptions for Cuba, but then we invented support for the Cuban people, SEP, or we've invented something called ACE, authorized cyber exports. So we are creating new license exceptions as time goes on, and sometimes we remove them. So just make sure you're aware of license exceptions that are available to you. That can be easily done by just looking at Part 740 of the EAR, where we have all of our license exceptions that you learned about yesterday. Okay, let's take a look at the next slide. Kind of goes without saying, you want to make sure all your documents and everything conform. Whatever you tell the whatever you submit in your electronic export information to the foreign trade regulations people, the census people, Edwards place, you want that to match with your license. So if it's going to go to Germany, then your bill of lading and airway bill should say Germany, all that kind of good stuff. So it's all got to be licensed and authorized. So make sure it's all reflected in your documentation. Excuse me, in part 758.5 of the EAR gives you lots of good details on what we mean by that. Next, please. Record keeping requirements. We got some questions on that yesterday, and James got some questions on that. Let's move into that. We got some questions through the moderation, but we didn't answer them because this is why. We're going to talk about it right now. A lot of questions you guys give us are great, but they're a bit premature, and we feel it's best that we get to a point where we present you the information, and then usually I'm not going to have any questions after that. If you do, you're going to have some good questions. So in this case, you're going to find that you do have to do some record keeping, some unique in part 6. So look on the left side of the page here. Part 762 of the EAR is where we have the section that's all about record keeping, and it talks about if you've got something going into Canada and it looks like someone else has an interest and all that kind of good stuff, that might be a red flag. So take a look at that. And 762 tells you all the things that you want to keep track of. Next, please. So, anyone who's, look at the EAR and you'll find out who's required to maintain records. Again, a lot of times your freight forwarder's involved in the transaction, so they might want to keep some records. All export control documents are defined in part 772 of the EAR. I call that the dictionary of the EAR. And then we have the documents in 762.2 as well. So, and then as a note, if you do submit things through SnapR, you don't have to retain copies of those because we've got them electronically. Next, please. One of the most important things is, and it's not such an issue nowadays, is that is it readable and is it legible? So first of all, the question that was answered yesterday, I think, and I'll reiterate it if you didn't hear it, 5 years from the date of export, et cetera, is when you are mandated to keep records for your company. So at least 5 years from date of export. Some of you keep them longer. So if you do keep them longer, that's fine. It's not such a burden anymore to companies as it used to be because you've got electronic methods of holding lots of information instead of stacks and stacks of bankers boxes of documentation, where back in the day when I exported, that's what our method was documents were going into record bankers boxes in the warehouse eventually. So but make sure that whatever records you have, that they're legible and readable. 762.5 talks about that. And export enforcement, they come knocking on the door and they say we'd like to take a look at your documents, it's a good idea that you cooperate because our regulations say in ECRA somewhere that it's a good idea that you do that. Otherwise, it might be a challenge. Next, please. So as a reminder, here's kind of a nice big view of the kind of things that we're looking for record keeping. Again, 5 years retention, and it's all detailed in 762. Next slide, please. Now, we're not the only ones who have record keeping requirements. I have to invite you to contact the Department of State, U.S. Customs, and the Census Bureau. The State Department is the Director of Defense Trade Controls. Customs is for you folks who do importing. They regulate that, and Census is the organization that does the EEI, electronic export information, that you learned from Edward. And they all have record keeping requirements. I do not dare say what their timelines are. I have to leave you to contact them because I don't want to misspeak and tell you if their dates of retention are longer or shorter than ours. Next, please. Training. Next, please. We're going to look at training, and we're really excited that your company was wise enough to invest in their most important asset, which is you, to learn about these regulations, because the more your company's employees know about our regulations, the more likely you're going to have regulation issues. And so sometimes we find people call us and they've got a violation after we go through their fact pattern, and it turns out that someone in the company just said, "Oh, we have a sale to Canada or Germany or whatever, and we just give it to courier service and send it over there. No big deal." But the problem is it might be a big deal because it might be a 38001 highly controlled item. It needs a license, and the person had no idea. They go, "Well, I'm just going to give it to this courier service and they'll take care of it." Well, that's not a good idea. So get your employees trained that have anything to do with exports and also with deemed exports, and that'll eliminate that. And so those of you who are going to go back to your company, let's go to the next slide. I guarantee you, some of you, if not most of you, if your company paid for you to go see this, they're going to say, why don't you explain to me what you learned in 4 days from the BIS complying with U.S. export controls seminar, and you're going to go, "Wow, that's kind of a tall order." Well, I'll give you some help. Go to our homepage and go into online resources. You can go into Exporter Portal on the home page, and then you go to online resources, and you'll have all these online resources in the Exporter Portal. And you'll see one of them is the training room, online training room. And that's, see, in the lower right-hand side is the depiction of the online training room. And the upper left-hand side of the bottom right slide is Export Controls, a quick start guide. And that's the best thing to show people is Export Controls, a quick start guide. Gives them a basic foundation as to how to comply with the regulations from a basic point of view. Next, please. Well, most of you have a greater ability to communicate to all of your employees than ever before in U.S. history or world history with the advent of the internet and intranets and email. So make sure that you get the word out through your intranet. Most of you guys have an intranet. We have an intranet also. So it's an in-house company website that gives you information for your employees to know. And it's great if you have incentive programs, bulletin boards, if you have handbooks and posters. It's all good, but get the word out, because it's important that the people in your company who need to know about this are informed about it. Next, please. So now we're going to take a look at the audit module. And again, we have an audit module in that book, and we have 4 different aspects to that. We have the and let's take a look at them right now. Next slide. the 4-level approach is plan, perform, present, and follow up. So you want to plan for it, you want to perform the audit, you want to present the outcome, and follow up. So, and this is going to help you detect any um, violations that may have occurred that you weren't aware of. And it's a good idea, like I believe James said, that if you find out a voluntary self-disclosure item, if you find out a violation, it's better that you voluntarily tell us rather than export enforcement stumbles upon it and goes, aha, you sent something to some country without license, and that's not a good thing. So let's see what we can do to help you do that by first planning. And obviously, you want to take a look at what business units are applicable, uh, the transactions that be audited, the audit template. Again, we have an audit template in our guidebook here. So again, you've got these tools in here. You've got audit templates. You've got audit, checklists. Um, it's always a good idea. I know most companies have an internal team. It's not a bad idea to bring an external auditing team every once in a while. And kind of like a lot of companies do inventory every year, at least that's what they used to do for physical items. You might want to do it once a year, just kind of to see if there's anything out there to be concerned about. Okay, next, please. So after you get the plan going, you want to take a look at those transactions procedures. Definitely have someone who's experienced at doing this. See if there's any gaps and inconsistencies you've got to work with. Take a look at talk to everybody at all levels to make sure that they know what's going on. So talk to your international sales team as well as your traffic department or your shipping department, because both those departments are usually very intimately involved with exporting at the company at two different levels, and there are two different skill sets: the skill sets of sales versus the skill sets of logistics and getting your item to different countries around the world, working with your freight forwarders. Next, please. After you do that, then definitely want to present get your findings, figure out what their findings are, and get buy-in from the management over there, and circulate a draft, and then get it over to management and get their buy-in. And next, and eventually you want to follow up. And if you have things that are an issue, then you want to implement corrective actions. When you do training internally, use your lessons for a lessons learned kind of thing, like, oh, we did this, now we've corrected it by doing this. And obviously, every company is interested in cost-effective and efficient improvements. So if you've got that as a result, that's a good thing. Next, violations and corrective actions. Next, please. So it's important that your employees feel safe if they discover that there is a violation, and 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 to give them more of a feeling of safety, you can even have an anonymous reporting mechanism if you feel you're worried about management not being too excited about things. Because if you've got a violation, it's important that the company realize it's important to work on it. Now, sometimes it's good that you have your own internal attorney take a look at it. If you export compliance attorney, external compliance attorney. But we, luckily for me, when I was exporting, both companies I exported at, they already had their bad experiences before I got there. They had essentially rogue salespeople, and I just say that kind of tongue in cheek, rogue salespeople. But they'd have an order of a controlled item, and they didn't know anything about the regulations. And they're like, "Hey, I got an order from Taiwan. I'm going to send it over there. Just give it to, XYZ freight forwarder." And it's like, uh-oh, we got an export violation. Export enforcement comes over, and our company's like, uh-oh, we didn't know about these regulations. So then the companies I was eventually hired at and worked for, had developed robust export compliance programs as a result of some of those painful experiences. So you definitely want to get that. Um, so as a result, when I had things come across my desk, I had things that were 3A001s that we were exporting, and they required a license, and I noticed that, uh-oh, it expired. So I told the sales department, we're going to stop it. And so my boss agreed. So we stopped it until we got a new license, stuff like that. So, all right, next, please. So again, I had the authority to immediately cease activities of concern. You should have that same ability. If you have something that is going to go out of the company, and your company says you need to send this out right away, whether it needs a license or not. That's not a good idea. If it needs to be sent out and it needs a license, you don't get one, because it's going to be no bueno. So also, if you determine, if you have to um, do some external notification, again, you might want to talk to counsel about that and determine if any other violations exist. You definitely want to cooperate with export enforcement if they're knocking on your door. Frequently, the companies and attendees in our seminars are usually not the ones who are going to have export violations. It's usually all the companies and people who don't attend these seminars that have that problem, because they either don't know the regulations or they know them and they just want to ignore them and hope they don't get caught. So luckily, that's not you. Next, please. All right. Uh, Back in the old days, the only way to pretty much get us to uh, get export enforcement to let them know that you were going to be submitting a voluntary self-disclosure, like James said yesterday. It used to be you have to mail it over to Washington, D.C., or use a courier service. We don't recommend. We haven't recommended mailing anything in Washington, D.C. for quite a while, because it's got to go through a big screening process to check for anthrax and crazy things like that. So guess what? That right there, which I'm sure was on James' slide in the bottom right, BIS underscore VSD underscore intake at bis.doc.gov, is the best way to submit your voluntary self-disclosure. But don't just start, putting that email address in there and typing away with no guidance. You want to make sure that you're very aware of and follow the instructions in the citation at the top of this slide, which is in part 764.5 of the AR. That tells you exactly what you need to do to submit a voluntary self-disclosure that's going to help export enforcement understand. You say, oh, sorry, we messed up. We had a license requirement, and for example, and but we sent it out under license exception CIV, and we didn't realize that license exception CIV was taken away a couple of years ago. So sorry about that. And then the export enforcement will go, okay, well, if it's an inadvertent violation of the EAR, it's one thing. And usually you get pretty good mitigating circumstances, as James said yesterday. But if export enforcement determines it's a willful violation of the AR, it's not doesn't bode as well for companies who are willfully violating the regulations for obvious reasons. Next, please. So corrective actions. Once you find out that there's an issue, determine the root cause. So, for example, someone tried to use CIV and it no longer exists. Well, the root cause is someone wasn't paying attention to the export administration regulations and realized that that license exception was removed. Of course, you want to develop practices that prevent future non-compliance, and roll your lessons into internal training. Sometimes companies will use very unique methods of detecting if people are complying with things when they find mistakes. So in this case, there was a mistake made. Someone used an old license exception, or someone maybe shipped something out 3A001, which is highly controlled, and they put an NLR and it somehow got through, and and that's almost never the case for the reasons for control. So um, anyway, make sure that you are going to look at those corrective actions and put them into play. Next, please. So build and maintain a manual. So that's element number 8 of the export compliance program. And when you read your export compliance book here, it's going to say, usually go, okay, you start with um, element number 1, which is management commitment, and then end up on number 8. And it is element number 8 when you've started from scratch, or no, when you've got a program that you're maintaining. But actually, it says if you're starting from scratch, you're going to be building a compliance program, and then you're going to get the management commitment and go from there. So let's take a look at what that looks like by pointing out that uh, you want to have it in writing. Uh, in my day, there's something called ISO 9000, and there's other things out there that organizations use that demand written information. So to make sure that there's no misunderstanding, and definitely you want to have it written so that if export enforcement says, "Hey, you know, uh, why'd you do this?" and you say, "Well, we messed up. But we have a written plan, so we're going to figure this out next time." So hopefully that's going to reduce penalties and fines if it was something that caused a penalty or fine. Next. So talk to a lot of your members of your organization. There are people in different parts of the organization that are involved with exports. So again, your traffic department or shipping department and your sales department are key in that. Your HR department for organizations that have foreign nationals that might be exposed to controlled U.S. technology or source code. Take a look at those vulnerabilities, divide up the responsibilities, and make sure that everyone is on board with that. That's going to get you started. Next, make sure it's pretty much very detailed. And on the right, you'll see it's got Megan from HR will include the following documents each shipment. It's very well detailed and all that. So that's really good to have, just because, and again, people go on vacation, people get sick, people leave the company. It's nice to have something to go by when someone's leaves the company. So, like in my case, sometimes we had a person that did imports. We only had one person did imports at our company. I was primary, and I was secondary, and I did exports along with 2 other people. But then when they were gone on vacation, I started doing the import compliance. So, and luckily we had a matrix and some procedures for me to look at. So if I hadn't done import clearances for quite a while or import operations, that helped me out. So I'm sure that would benefit you if you get an operational plan going. Next, please. More than ever, the regulations have and do change. So definitely keep on top of the regulatory updates. We do the best we can to advise you on our website by different bulletins we put out and email notifications on our website. Keep track of your product changes, because sometimes if you develop new products and make significant uh, technical specification changes in your item, like version 1.0 might have this capability and it might be 3A991, for example, but then you make a really sophisticated version of the item and it turns the ECCN into 3A002. So in other words, what I'm saying is you might have an item that's 3A991 or something like that, which has an AT control. There's no license required in most areas of the world. But then you do a bunch of modifications and all of a sudden it changes into another ECCN that's highly controlled. So you have to make sure that you're aware that that ECCN of the new product is a controlled item and requires a license and act accordingly. So again, make sure that you've got a central contact. In our commodity classification table on our website, we've got some good points of contact at different companies. If you're looking for someone to contact to get an ECCN from them. and if they're volunteering for our system. And definitely you want to have some, you know, get that maintained either online or physically. Obviously, physically distribution is the best. Next, please. So too much policy, not enough detailed procedures, that could be an issue. Make sure that, you do your audits and, well, we definitely want to have a contact person. Some companies are so huge, there's no way you're going to find the export compliance program person very easily because they might be centralized in one area of the country and have far-flung, operations around the world. So, take that into consideration. Okay, next slide. And again, here is a great video to take a look at to reiterate what I just told you and to show others at your company if they are interested in developing an export compliance program. Here's our training video.